If you've ever been told when you're first starting to garden or heard people say to start with tomatoes because they're one of the easiest things to grow in the garden, I'm here to say right now that that is a lie. Tomatoes are not one of the easiest plants to start with. They actually have a lot of nuances and are kind of a little bit finicky depending upon your climate in order to ensure that you have a healthy tomato plant and that tomato plant produces a lot of tomatoes for you. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys a behind the scenes look at how to successfully plant tomatoes so you get a huge robust harvest even in a more usually cool and wet climate like the Pacific Northwest. And I'm going to be sharing it from our special in-person gardening workshop day that we had here at the farm stay just a couple of weeks ago. And I'll be honest, I had intentions of doing a behind the scenes like the day of. I was gonna have the camera with me as I was getting ready and we were coming down and giving like a whole behind the scenes tour. But we were in no way, shape, or form was I able to do that. We ended up getting power to this building where we started the workshop just a few days before the workshop actually was. We were supposed to have power to it much earlier, but as contracting and power companies go, they pushed the date back on us. So we literally, the night before the workshop started, we were getting all of these lights hung and actually moving everything into the building, including the refrigerator, the sink, and all the shelving. So by the time we got done and the next morning came, I don't even know that I had my camera charged, and it was like the last thing on my mind. In fact, I didn't even get myself with my own phone any pictures of the day. I remembered that night, I'm like, oh, I didn't take a single picture in order to share. So I was really thankful that I had somebody else working the camera, which is what you're gonna see in just a few minutes when we share what that day looked like. But I wanted to be able to share it with you because you guys have been on this journey with me of watching us get the farm. It's not even been a full year, what this barn looked like, and to what it's evolving to now, and then with our very first in-person workshop and starting the teaching portion here on the farm. So, at our planting time, there's a couple of unique things when we're planting our tomatoes other than doing our soil amendments. And that is your tomato plant will actually set more roots when the bottom of the stem becomes in contact with soil. So if you're growing tomatoes in pots, most of the time when I see people have issues growing tomatoes in pots, they're growing them in too small of a pot because they really actually have a very extensive root system when they've got the room to spread out. So what you want to do is we're always going to come and I just use my fingernail. You can use snips, you can use scissors, whatever. And we always want to take off the two bottom leaves. You always want to make sure when they're little that you're leaving enough on top that can feed back to the plant, right? That you're not completely giving it a haircut so much that it's got like one little leaf at the top. So I always take off the two bottom ones. And then when we plant this and we dig our hole, we're going to dig it deep enough that we can bury it all the way up to just a couple of inches beneath this now what will be the bottom branch. Because, and you can actually kind of see this one, you'll see little bumps along the stem, and those are what are little root nodes that are trying to grow. So as soon as those hit soil, those are going to become roots. So they're going to allow it to uptake more nutrients, uptake more moisture and water, and then it's going to be a bigger, healthier plant. And really the goal there is for it to create more tomatoes for us, because we're not looking to keep this over each year. We're just wanting to get the most production we can out of it during our growing summer months. So making sure that you do that. And you'll see where some, if you've watched online, like some people will say, instead of digging a deep hole, they'll dig a trench and they'll lay it in there sideways and just have the top coming out. Or you can dig down deeper, and it's the same It's the same thing. It's just depending if you have the space to lay it horizontally and let it come up, that's great. If your soil allows you to dig down deep enough, you can just dig a deeper hole. So it's the same thing. You're just providing more root for the tomato plant, either way you put it in there. So I usually just start, especially with the two of us, we're just gonna dig the hole. And I usually will just kind of space it a little bit. I try to put it a little bit towards the inside here so that if I do need to cover it, you know, the majority of the plants will actually be under cover. Yeah, so I just do, one there and then kind of one there. And there's usually enough room for 3. And then when they are placed this close together, like towards the end of the season, which we'll talk about pruning with tomato plants too, they'll be close together, but I've still always been able to pick and harvest with them that close, and they do just fine. So these just, you know, push up from the bottom with these seed cells. They're not the soft kind that you can just squeeze them out. So we're just going to pop them up like this. And this one I've already trimmed out. And the nice thing about these is they have enough air slits, like we were talking about the air pruning. If there's air when things are in container, it stops the roots from root bound because they feel the air and it signals to them, this isn't soil. And so they stop, which is nice because when they get root bound and the roots are just circling and circling, that poses a lot of problems. So we're just going to make sure that the hole is deep enough, and it definitely is. Yeah. So we'll just pull that back out, and then we'll put the amendments in, and then just kind of work that in with the soil a little bit. And then you do always, whenever you prune, regardless if it's fruit or vegetable pruning, which I usually only prune the tomatoes, so you always want to make sure that you remove what you've pruned out so that that doesn't harbor disease or anything like that. So we just always pull those out of the planting area. So one of the things on this tomato plant, which you guys are welcome to like come closer if you want to, even though I pruned off the bottom leaves, I didn't want to take too much off because I know that this is going to need some leaf left on there to actually help the plant grow. However, you'll see that these ones particularly, this is down on the ground. So with tomatoes, you don't want to have the bottom leaves touching the ground because that is a highway for any bugs or any type of soil-borne disease to just march right up onto your plant. So I don't want to remove this entire one. So what I'm going to do is just take it at the halfway point. And then this isn't touching the ground, but it still has some extra leaf support to be able to feed back to it. So as your tomato plants grow, that's something that you'll want to continue to watch. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to come back out here because the plant's going to be much taller. These are also going to be longer and they're going to be touching the ground. So I continually remove the bottom portion of the vines all throughout the summer if it's going to be touching the dirt at any point. Now, when it comes to pruning tomatoes, you're going to hear lots of different viewpoints on if you need to prune tomatoes to increase fruit production or not. So one of the things you'll hear is tomatoes will send up suckers. And so suckers are where you've got this first main vine that's coming out and the trunk. So a sucker will come right up from the crotch. And so you'll have some people that will tell you to pinch off every single sucker. It's just going to draw, it's just sucking nutrients off from your tomato plant. Get rid of them. However, your suckers will produce tomatoes. So if you prune every sucker plant off, you actually are pruning off some blossoms that will form. The theory is that the blossoms that are produced without suckers, if you remove the suckers, that those will be bigger and more prolific. I tend to ride somewhere in the middle. So what I do is I will let the bottom suckers on about the bottom quarter of the plant, I let those grow and produce me more tomatoes. I do remove from about a quarter to the third of the plant up, I do remove those suckers. One, because as I sometimes up here, we have gotten an early frost as early as mid-September. Other years, which are the years I pray for, it doesn't come until October. So I know that the suckers that are formed on the bottom of the plant will likely have the time to mature and actually create tomatoes for me. The ones that are at the top of the plant's going to get killed by a frost anyways before they have any opportunity. And so it's kind of keeping that in balance too. So that it's not, there's enough food that is able to feed to the blossoms and the tomatoes that are being formed without letting every sucker, but I don't take all of the suckers off. I have some years I've, kind of tested where I've done it, taken them all off of some, left some on others. I personally didn't notice any difference, the ones that I took them all off and the ones that I just left the bottom portion. So, but play around with it. I mean, that's kind of the fun thing about gardening. And like you heard Seth saying, like trial this and trial that and see what works for you. So just keep in mind that the tomatoes will get really big. So whatever you use to tie, you want to make sure that it's going to support. So I wouldn't use like really thin string because it will likely bust. Or the really thin string, actually as the plant grows, can either cut into it, or if it is really windy and you've tied it tight, it can actually kind of saw and cut into it and create a weak point on it too. So baling twine works great. This is kind of that thicker jute twine, and that works. And so for these that are on the outside here, if you're really worried about the wind and that type of a thing, these are really so little that normally I wouldn't bother even supporting them yet, but just so that you guys can kind of see some examples. But I do tie it beneath. I like to tie it around the trunk, but beneath where one of these vines are so that it kind of has an extra support. Otherwise, it's just going to slide down until it hits one of the next branches. And I'm tying it loose because I know when it's this young that as this grows, this main trunk on this tomato is going to get a lot bigger. So I don't want to tie it to the size it is now where you're going to run the risk of pinching it off. So I will just do kind of a loose, enough that it will hold it. And this also helps. I mean, and you can just do a slip knot. Oftentimes I'll do a slip knot. So if I come out, in a month or so and realize like, oh, I really didn't gauge the size that I should have, it's a little tight, then I can just quickly do the slip knot, undo it, and then refasten it. But doing it loose is helpful so that if it is really windy, it has some room to still give and sway. Because when the plant is swaying back and forth, that signals to the roots, you need to go deeper, I'm not stable. So you actually want some of that movement. And that's kind of one of the purposes of hardening plants off, is because when they're indoors and they don't have the stimuli of the wind, they don't have strong roots. They're actually quite weak. And so the wind is not a bad thing if it's too much. So you don't want to take out all movement. So I tie this a little bit loose around here so that as it's windy, if it's super tight, you're going to have a sawing motion. So that way this is still moving, but it would stop it from breaking and going all the way over. And then I just would tie this portion because I usually wait until they're about this high before I actually tie them up. And then you can just tie this right to the support, like just right there, and that'll hold it. Now, once you have your tomatoes planted and they're growing robustly, in order to keep them healthy, you're gonna wanna know how to prune your tomatoes, especially to help keep them disease-free. So you can go and check out this video that will walk you through all of those steps. If you'd like to come to an in-person workshop here on the farm, we have 2 more this summer. I'll put the links below. We've got one in August that's on preserving, and then we have a medicinal one that's in September. Now, speaking of preserving your tomatoes, if you've already got tomatoes on and want to make tomato sauce that is not runny and doesn't require all of the extra simmering down, then make sure that you go and check out this video.